Hi, my name is Barry Horner, and I'm your host on today's episode of Stake and Soul, the podcast that's dedicated to demystifying the world of employee ownership. Stake refers not just to the financial or beneficial ownership, but also to the vested interest, the sense of responsibility, and the feeling of belonging that comes with being an employee owner. Soul is all about company culture, the values, the shared purpose, and the human connection that are amplified and shaped by employee ownership. Soul is the company's silent language. Join us for Series 1 as we sit down with business leaders and CEOs who have successfully navigated their journey to employee ownership. Today we are doing something a little different. We're not just talking about employee ownership, we're talking to a pioneer from a company that practically invented the model. Our guest works for Scott Bader, a global chemical company that became employee-owned all the way back in 1951. They are an incredible blueprint for a business where profits and purpose truly meet. Our guest embodies this unique structure. He didn't start in the boardroom. He began on the shop floor as a process operator and worked his way up. Please welcome Sam Boustred, the chair of the Global Members Board at Scott Bader. Sam is the independent, full-time voice of every single employee owner across the globe, leading what the company calls its industrial democracy. Sam has been heavily involved with employee representative positions, first as the UK Community Councillor and UK Board Director, then joining the Members' Assembly with the appointment to chair after 18 months. He's a member of the Remuneration Committee, and as chair of this body and following a review of the Constitution, the Members' Assembly is now the Global Members Board. Sam is working hard to continue the work of the founder in growing employee ownership movement both domestically and internationally. Sam, we are truly honoured to have you here today to discuss the delicate balance of governance, growth and grassroots democracy in a multinational employee-owned business. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Barry. Great to be here.
So, Sam, I think a good place to start would be, I was just fascinated just reading a bit of your history around how your career, what took you then into the business that you're in. So maybe it'd be good for listeners just to hear a bit of your journey, starting with you, and then a little bit about the business. That just gives us a bit of a context for the amazing business that you work for.
Yeah, sure. So I work in the company Scott Bader. We're based in Northamptonshire, in Wollaston, small village, and I grew up in Wollaston. I always promised myself I wouldn't work for that horrible company, the smelly company. It used to smell a little bit back in the day. Went to university, did a degree there, but left during the financial crash in 2007-8, and was just looking for work. And a friend of mine was working in the factory and said, "Do you want to come and work with me?" So I just said yes. Needed the money. Had a baby on the way as well. So started working here. Had no idea that the company was employee owned. Had this incredible history, but that soon became apparent. Talking to some of the older colleagues, and they were saying, it was built on these principles, and I got involved in the local council, the UK Community Council, after about 18 months. Couple of reasons. I was nosy, always wanted to know what was happening, and I think that's a great reason to get involved. You're interested, and I wanted to move out of the plant. I always knew I wanted to do more and to excel in the business, and I thought it was a great way to network. So I spent a few years as a community councillor representing my colleagues in the plant, and during that time, career progressed, and I moved into the training scheme. So I was helping like an MVQ kind of scheme that we have here, making sure everyone works to the same standards, developed that scheme so that we could do that internationally, so that all of the plants all over the world, we've got 7 manufacturing sites, all of those plants would work to the same standard. And whilst that was happening, having a great time doing all of that, I was still involved in the democratic side, and that was the stuff that really, revved my engine. That was the thing that really excited me. So,
why was that, Sam? What was it particularly about the democratic side that fascinated you?
It was just having a say. and getting that exposure, the experience to how the company really operates. So shifting from the here's my very operational part of I'm a cog essentially, maybe, but this was seeing the bigger picture, meeting more people from all over the group, getting that different perspective, and really finding out more about us as a business by meeting more and more people from around all different parts of the globe. Where I really, really fell in love with the idea of Scott Bader was when the first time I went to the Employee Ownership Conference. And I did that when I first joined the Members Assembly. And I thought, well, let's go and find out what this is. And I can remember sitting in, it was a financial it was a financial presentation on what sort of information do you share. And I was thinking, we do all of this. That's not that special, because I hadn't had that much experience outside of what I'd always known in Scott Bader, the odd jobs as a kid and stuff like that. But it was, and I was thinking, well, if that's, normal for us and we do even more, we do really have something special. So, involved in the Members Assembly, was vice chair, and was again really always knocking on the chair's doors to find out what was going on and how we could help and move things forward. And unexpectedly, that chair stepped down, and the opportunity was presented to me. Should I go for it? And I very nearly didn't, because I was terrified of speaking at the AGM. And that was one thing that I thought, well, you've just got to say yes to these things. So did it. And
how many people would be at the AGM?
So we would do it online. We'd probably have around 350 to 500, depending on the year. But it was online, so it's not that scary. But it was that public speaking that I was so afraid of doing. But look back now, so glad I did. And now every AGM I smile to myself and think, this is a breeze. And it was the thing that nearly stopped me from doing everything ever since.
How interesting. When you, just going back a moment or so ago, you said when you first joined the business, you just, you hadn't got a lot of experience of other businesses, and you just joined thinking it's another firm. And suddenly you realized, not long after being there, this is actually quite different and quite special. What was it that captivated you in those early days by thinking, wow, this is different? Were there any particular things that you saw or experienced where you thought, wow, this is special?
Yeah, there was. It was certainly the way people honoured our history. And usually, I was in a manufacturing area, be a load of blokes moaning about things, how it used to be better. So, but that was honouring the past and about how special things were. And I think accepting that things still are quite good, really. It was, I had a fantastic first manager, team leader called John Payne. He's still here. And he would always talk about that kind of the soul, I guess, as you would put it, how it feels different, and that we would all, we'd all take a little bit when we needed some. And what we mean by that is we might finish a bit early if we'd all given some, but it was always about you give more and you take a little back bit if you can. So there was that aspect. There was the social elements. There was lots and lots of clubs that were still happening. There was summer dance that we would do. There would be, Christmas lunch, got that coming up. Lots and lots of different things. That was the kind of community element to it. It was more than just you come here, you clock in, you do your 8 hours and you clock out. It was what it felt like to work here.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, you've covered or touched a little bit on the history. This is a business that was 1951 I think you started.
19,
Well, not you, but
yes, before my time.
the business.
The business started in 1921.
21.
Yeah,
okay.
So we celebrated our centenary 4 years ago. And it started in 1921 by Ernest Bader, Swiss immigrant, came over, and he was selling celluloid. So that's not, I'm not a chemist, but the kind of plasticky stuff. And one of the big early successes was, those little windmills you get on the beach that you put in the sandcastle. We're selling the material to make those. So
oh wow, okay.
And a nice little piece that we have now is we're selling to wind blades. So the gel coats that go on there. So been doing windmills for 100 years. So 1920, 21, normal business, came over, but Ernest detested the rat race, the kind of conventional business world. And he, with his partner, Dora Scott, which forms the Scott Bader, they created this business and moved out of London in 1940 to this place here in Wollaston. I sit in this manor house that was their home, with a factory in the garden. So these, we've got this enormous site with all of the manufacturing out the back. And moved out of London because it was the bombing. That was important because Ernest was a Quaker, and
right.
we still have Quaker principles in the business, although I don't think we have any Quakers anymore, but there are certain aspects that still hang over from that. So the part of meetings begin with a moment of silence, which is a Quaker practice. And another important feature that still remains within our constitution is that we will not manufacture weapons or manufacture materials that can be used for weapons of war. So we don't do any of that, even though they're usually the most lucrative contracts. We're saying that's not what we're about, and that will remain in the business. And part of that thinking, that early Quaker thinking, led to a number of false starts of the Commonwealth, because what Ernest was trying to do was create this third way between war-based capitalism and state-based communism. He said there must be a different way of not only doing business, but doing a new social order, which is what he was trying to do, quite lofty. And what we had was, this was happening 1947, and there were still lots of people who had been supporting, the boys had, been off fighting the war. And it was really difficult to say, we're not supporting the rearmament. But it was actually, so Ernest had promised that we're going to do something different with the company. We're going to have ownership, or common ownership, as he would call it. But it was a strike in 1951, and we hadn't had one for a long time since then, that caused Ernest to say, fine, I did say I'd do it. And the strike was saying, look, you said you would, come on now. And then the Commonwealth was born following that. And
you just unpack that a bit. You've mentioned about the Commonwealth, but just in terms of what that represents and the thinking behind setting up the charitable foundation, it would be good to just dig into that a little bit, Sam, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So so 1951, we didn't have the luxury of an employee ownership trust. Mm-hmm. It didn't exist. Mm. And even that may not have been the right answer for what Ernest was trying to achieve. We talk about employee ownership now in Scott Bader, but really what Ernest wanted to achieve was no ownership or common ownership. He wanted to dissolve the shares so that capital wasn't employing people. It was people employing capital, is the way he would put it.
Right. Yeah.
So he wanted a place to put the shares where they would be safe and not be able to be sold or given away. So he gifted all of those shares with Dora and his son Godfrey, the family who owned the shares, gifted them into this new entity called the Scott Bader Commonwealth. And that had, from the very outset, it had charitable ambitions. It was meant to do good, not only for the people, but also for the communities in which they came from. So from then, we had this principle, which is still in the Constitution today, is that for all of the profit we make, 60% or a minimum of 60% must go back into the business. And the reason was he didn't want to give it to a load of people and they just extract all of the wealth out of it. So 60% must go back into the business. Up to 20% we can distribute amongst all of the people who work there, the employees. And we call that the group staff bonus. And what we do there, the GMB, my board, is responsible for determining how that money is distributed, whether it's pound for pound, you get a pound of value in the UK, or if you're in South Africa or Sweden, wherever, or we use, what we do is a purchasing parity mechanism, and we call it the Big Mac index. So you get Big Macs all over the world. How many Big Macs can you buy? So if you can buy 100 in the UK, you can buy 100 in South Africa or 100 in Canada, wherever. But we use that mechanism to distribute the funds. So up to 20% can be distributed that way. And then whatever we give to ourselves, we must give to the Commonwealth, who will distribute that into the local communities. So they're responsible for grant giving, for funding charities and all of those elements. In practice, we don't usually go up to 20%. It's been around 5% and more money going back into the business, because business is expensive. We've got a lot of reinvestment that's needed. So but that is at the heart of that redistribution of cash. So it began with some elements of profit sharing. How do we make sure that we're generating wealth in this way? Colleagues have a meaningful say in how that cash is generated, and we do that via the boards and bodies, people voted into these areas. And then you have a say on how it's distributed. So at the general meeting, we will vote on which charities we want to send big grants to. So anything over £10,000 needs to be voted on by the members. And then the third element of our kind of employee ownership, the move from profit share to common ownership, is how it feels to work here. And that's the bit that requires lots and lots of attention.
And where's the tension between those three? Because as you say, it's not quite the same as a EOT, but an EOT still has the same. I'm thinking of the new CEO who's taken over from me, and the tension between paying out essentially the deferred consideration, paying the profit share. We have a charitable foundation. We want to build the business. And they are in conflict, and you need good governance to determine how to best allocate those scarce resources. How does that work in a big business like yours, in terms of there must be competing demands? I guess there must be times when some of the team think, yeah, I really like this charitable thing, but quite a lot of money is going to the charitable foundation. Could not a bit more go towards pay rises or whatever? How do you solve that one?
So there's the governance. So the first thing to say is it's really easy when there's loads of money. And, like any other business, employee ownership becomes harder when there's less cash sloshing around. So, and another element, there's slightly different tension as well, with the Commonwealth being the top co, with all of the shares being in there. They've got to make sure that they're able to fulfill their charitable objects, because there's tension from the Charity Commission as well to make sure they're doing what they need to do. Now, this 60-20-20 split means that there is money going into the Commonwealth, so they can achieve their objects, and they'll have their strategy on who they want to support where. But if the business was not doing as well as it needs to, there's a safety mechanism within the Constitution that says if there isn't enough profit to distribute, it falls down to 1% of the group salary cost. So let's say that's 30 million, then you get £300,000 that goes into the Commonwealth, so they can continue to operate.
Right, with you. Yeah.
What becomes difficult is when it isn't clear how much the business is expecting to make over 2, 3, 4 years, because then you can't plan on doing big projects with charities. You can't commit to, we're going to give you £50,000 over the next 5 years. So it has to be more piecemeal. But part of the Commonwealth strategy is to support smaller charities that find it harder to get funding. So we do lots and lots of really small charities with smaller donations. But that builds up. So over the last 5 years, the Commonwealth has given away, I think, about £1.7 million to charities in all of our communities to do good there. There's an added tension from a Commonwealth perspective. Then is, what is the social return on investment, which is kind of the holy grail in charity. Kind of, how do you know that you're making a difference there? And we're working on building what that might look like, so we can then go to the business with a reasonable case to say, well, yes, you can do this and you're expected to get this return, but over here we're able to make more meaningful change for more people over here. So that would be where there's some tension. Governance wise, the company will come to the Commonwealth Board and the Global Members Board and the Group Board to sign off the strategy for each year. So what we're doing there is getting an agreement that this is the way forward, and that should the tension comes from holding one another to doing what we said we're going to do. That's where most of that's where the difficult conversations come in. If you said we're going to grow by X, then we need to be able to do this. If you haven't done that, that's what makes it, that's what brings out the difficult conversations.
Yeah. Well, what's been the biggest challenges in recent days around that governance piece and that allocation? If there's anything you can share on that, just insights around how to best navigate something like that. Because as you say, it's in the challenging times, and many businesses are going through challenging times right now, that I guess it puts those models to the test, doesn't it?
The biggest one is difficult in every business, I'm sure, is redundancy. That is really hard, because all through the year we're saying we're employee owned, and you get the discretionary effort, and we're a different type of company, but we face the same pressures any other company does as well. So when you have to have those conversations, it's really difficult. Tend to take what's easy is a kind of utilitarian approach, which is the most good for the most people. So that's often the conversation that we have to have within our constitution, our code of practice. It's not just about sharing the good times. We should be sharing the hard times as well. So in there, if the company is under pressure, we first have to ask ourselves whether it's suitable that we all take a pay cut before we make any redundancies. But if it is in the long-term interest, that's a short-term fix. So if there's a blip, if we might take that approach. If fundamentally we need to transform the business, then you have to make the redundancies. So from the Global Members Board, our perspective on this must remain we're asking the question that owners would be asking, owners of business. We have at a local level, like the UK Council, which I used to form, they're looking after the employee. So together we should have employee owners. We're looking after the owners. So can we live with this? Is this within our values? Does it feel like it's the right thing to do? And what the local councils are doing is saying, are we treating all of those people who are going through this incredibly difficult period, are they being treated in the right way, with respect, with openness, and it's all being done fairly? So that's how we've done it. It isn't perfect. It's really, really horrible. But so far, that's the best way we've done it. I'd like us to do some more, and with some more forward thinking around the redundancy part. Mass redundancies, I don't think, should be an enormous surprise unless something catastrophic has happened. So with a longer term plan, how can we make sure we're moving people around to get the best out of them and they can stay within the business? Or we have incredible training schemes that means that, you know, if you were a player at Scott Bader, you can join any other team, you know. So if I don't follow football, but if you were in the Manchester United academy and you were moved out of Manchester United, you could probably get a game at Stoke City, for example.
Right.
Yeah. I used to have a Stoke City season ticket, so I don't mean to offend anyone with that. But that kind of mindset, because it is so traumatic, because it's about job security and it's about how you put food on the table. That's no different whether you're employee owned or not. So that's been a big challenge. I've got many more. If that's helpful, we've gone through an enormous amount over the last, well, over the decades, but certainly over the last few years as well.
Well, I guess if anything springs to mind, as you and I were just chatting a little earlier, you know, I'm an absolute fan of employee ownership. I think it's an absolutely great model around legacy and building for the future. But equally, as we're now 6 years into becoming employee owned, you realise that, you know, there are definitely challenges. We've already touched on that sort of whole allocation piece of how you pay down the DC, etc. But I think quite often at conferences and events and things, it's all the positives that get brought out, and there are lots. But sometimes it's the war stories and the challenges that actually cause people to think, actually, yeah, there are issues we're going to have to grapple with. So if there's anything else that springs to mind of something, you know, a business that's been going since 1921, there are probably things that you could potentially share that you think, actually, that might help someone else mitigate that or whatever. So if there is anything that springs to mind, it'd be great to.
Yeah, so it is interesting when you go to the conference and you'll realise this, you know, as you go over the next few years, is that everyone is so excited in the early days where it's new and it's fresh. But when it isn't new or fresh and it's all you've ever known, then some complacency comes in. You know, it's the kind of business as usual, and the kind of bright light or the flame that is employee ownership or whatever that soul is, that can shift. And what you need are people to change what that flame looks like and for it to evolve and adapt over time. But you've got to be careful about what's special, and you need brilliant leaders who recognise what is special and is able to take it into the next generation, what that will look like. One example of where sometimes that's difficult is people always trying to do the right thing. But one thing that brings tension or conflict is we can take the Constitution, which is our set of rules, our manifesto of the balance between power, justice and freedom, some of these early concepts that Ernest had. And they'll say, well, you need this approval in this order. And that's true. That's what the Constitution says. But that might be very different to a different leader who is saying, well, if we're picking up the Constitution, we've already made a mistake. It's about how we work together. And no one is wrong in those moments, but I think we all need to be on the same page around how we work together. And in a large business that has shifted over time, the management has changed a lot, structurally, strategically, lots and lots of moving parts. How you keep that, the core essence, the soul, requires deliberate attention. You've really got to think about it. Otherwise it will drift, and you'll have that kind of culture by default rather than design.
And how do you do that, Sam, across multiple sites? Because again, that will be an interesting question or an interesting bit of thinking for other people who have got, I mean, we've got 4 offices. You're multi-country, not just offices in the UK. How do you maintain that? It feels to me that when the business was started, there are those founding principles that are the sort of the culture and the heartbeat of the business. But I guess as you bring in new people and the business evolves, how have you managed to keep that sort of culture running through everything you do? Does that go back to the sort of onboarding process, for example, when new people join? It'd be interesting to know how you've gone about doing that.
Yeah, sure. So a couple of years ago, 2022, we reviewed our constitution, and that was a fantastic piece of work, going through every single line to make sure we understood why it was there and where it had come from. But the important bit for all of our colleagues was, how do they understand what the Constitution is? Because you might enjoy reading articles of association and the rules, but not everyone does, if you can believe it.
No, for sure.
So we created something called the Members Guide, which was the easy version for all of colleagues all over the world in 7 different languages, so they could pick it up and it be their handbook, or their guide to democracy, or guide to why Scott Bader is different, what rights they have, what are our values, our guiding principles, all of these different things that should make it special. So there's the written version. You get that when you join the company. Here's a copy of our constitution and the members guide. Flick through that when you can, because when you join a business, that's probably one of the last things you're thinking about. You want to know where the coffee machine is, where the toilet is, and who you got to watch out for, the dynamics and that kind of stuff. So it takes a long time to understand the different type of business, particularly ours, because it is quite complicated. And what I want people to learn from the beginning is we're different for these simple reasons. And it's only when you join the boards and bodies that you get to know the kind of the other side of the history, the employee ownership. I want everyone to know we're employee owned. I'd be happy if everyone's got to know we're employee owned. The next level is you've got to know what common ownership means in Scott Bader. And then the next level is another evolution of that. So what was the new social order and these kind of things? I think there's a kind of graduation that people need to go through. And not everyone will, but if you want to join the boards and bodies, you should know some of this stuff. But onboarding, what we do is you will meet your local councillor, if you have one, if you're on a site with a local council, or your local members board rep will reach out to you, have a chat, make sure you're fitting in the right way. And before that, you are given this kind of onboarding program that involves these kind of meetings with different people, like people from the boards and bodies, so you get to know them. But what we created a couple of years ago was this e-learning. And so we built it internally, and that takes you through really basically the history of the company, the governance structure, your voting rights, why you should become a member, and all of this kind of stuff. So you should be able to go through that in your own time. The idea is once you've done all of these and had lots of little snippets of what's different, that in 6 months you're invited to this culture cafe, which we run lots of times in the year. And that isn't where you learn about the company, because you should have had most of it drip fed into you by then, but you can have a proper or an engaged conversation around why it's different, or what you've experienced, how it could be improved. And
so, just Sam, which part of the business runs whose responsibility is the culture cafe? Is that your area?
So we share it with
HR,
we share it with HR.
Right.
So there's a business element as well, and so you've got the HR are doing a lot of the business, and then we'll invite people into this session who sat on different boards, and they'll talk about their own experience, and we'll share with them, here are some weird situations. How would you behave in these scenarios, to really draw out the values and what is the Scott Bader way of dealing with some of these things. So that's the Culture Cafe. In parallel to this, we've just begun doing something called a Membership Connect, and we just piloted this in France. Because they're sometimes our toughest audience, which is good. That's great. That's the kind of democratic way of getting them involved. And we talked again for all of the management team, because it's changed quite a bit. Here's the history, the governance, and a recap of all of that, with the connect at the end, which is well, what do we need to do? What do we need to know as a Commonwealth or as a GMB that we can take back in to make sure that this is kind of the you said we did stuff, you're unhappy about this. What can we do to fix it? And it means that we're more visible as well, so that we did this in Amiens. We had the internally elected directors on the Commonwealth attend that meeting, and I taught them all through what employee ownership means and what it should mean for us.
How does that forum differ then to the Culture Cafe? Because it sounded from what you've just said, they're serving quite similar purposes in making sure that the values and culture of the business is that lived experience, not just something that happens to be written down somewhere.
So the Culture Cafe is for the new starters. So
just new starters, okay.
Yeah, and then but if you're not living this every day, if you're not chair of the global members board,
yeah,
get it.
Yeah,
so it is a cycle we've got to go to all the different sides to go and connect with more people. Firstly with the managers, and then with some others as well. Because in this company, we've got people who've been here for over 40 years, and you can't do a kind of one and done with the onboarding and expect everyone to know it.
Of course. How do you measure not necessarily engagement, but more the outputs of being employee owned? Or do you measure that in terms of people anecdotally love being part of an employee owned business, but there's often a lot of data that gets produced, which is, EO businesses are more productive, they retain their team for longer period. Do you measure that data? And if so, is there anything you could share on that from Scott Bader around those sort of the dynamics of EO businesses?
We don't measure, but I know the EOQ thing looks really interesting. So I think we're going to be looking at that as well. What we do is for the GMB, all of the reps will go out and fill out their constituency report, and in there it will show how many people have used their volunteering day, how many people have voted in the latest election, how many people stood for a position if it's open, an elected position. So what we're kind of going through is, here's lots of data on how your constituency is doing, and if there's a big shift, we can investigate why. One thing is a big blank space that we've yet to put in is a happiness index, which I know is what Emperor do. I saw that at an EO conference maybe a couple of years ago. So a little bit of extra data. So, if we were to say that we're concerned about this particular area, there's some evidence as well to say we've gone from 7 out of 10 to 5.5, or whatever it might be.
With you. In terms of information sharing, often within employee and businesses, we talk about sort of information influence and reward, and the reward in your business is done slightly differently to perhaps a traditional EOT. But in terms of the information sharing, what sort of information do people get across the business as employee owners in Scott Bader? How do you distribute that information and make sure that people feel really clued into whether you're doing well or not, as the case may be?
Yeah, so it shifts a lot because we've had a lot of change here, but what has remained consistent for the last 18 months is something we call the members report, and that's something that I and the rest of the Commonwealth Office team put together, and in there we'll talk about a little bit from me on what's been happening, what have the GMB been up to, what has the charity been up to, what are they doing, what is happening in governance, who's been elected or moved around. Then there's a bit on the customer, what are our customers doing, is there a story there, a bit on our environmental stuff, what's new in that part. Most important bit not the most, Commonwealth's the most important bit. The bit that most people are interested in is the finances as well.
Yeah.
So
sure.
We'll get to there. And the reason we started with this thing called the members report was, what would shareholders get in a more conventional type business? So a quarterly report that is aimed at you, the owner. And I think I start everything. This is your report so that you have all of the information you need to be an owner of your business. So the kind of think like an owner, behave like an owner is the kind of mantra that we have behind that. So that's one thing that comes out quarterly. To supplement that, we have all of the usual stuff that you can have in any other business. So we have cascades from management. I'll start with a monthly information pack, and I'll go through the business on what is the business doing it from that part. But it isn't necessarily employee owned. The employee owned angle is certainly from us.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. In terms of leading the business and general leadership within an EO business, do you think that people that you recruit and are people in Scott Bader think quite differently to a non-EO business? I've just been reflecting recently on the different role that you have as the CEO of an EO business and the additional responsibility that you have to make decisions on behalf of the sort of beneficiary group. But in terms of the folk that you have in your business, do you train them in a different way than you would have a competitor that wasn't in an EO business, for example, do you think?
So we don't do any specific training. I know that we used to, and this is going back decades, Greenleaf servant leadership, that was a big part of how we would do it. It is a live conversation now around leading in an EO business. And that was something I took away from the employee conference. It doesn't need to be different. You're leading owners. So how do you do that differently? And our constitution says that, it's basically leadership by consent, because we're also the owners as well. In practice, we don't do anything formally, but something we often ask is, how is your style adapted now you're here? And for those who haven't adapted, maybe they were the right fit, or maybe they were the wrong fit if they haven't changed. So it does need to be different here. Over the last few years, there has been a real challenge in getting talent. And I don't think that's true for everyone. It makes it extremely competitive to find the right people with the right skills and then the right kind of attributes. Attributes. So that's been a challenge. We've made some appointments that we perhaps shouldn't have.
Do you mean, Sam? It's finding talent's been a real challenge because you're employee owned and perhaps the package looks slightly different to the competitor? Or do you mean just the landscape in your industry at the moment is just really hard to find good people? Which of the two did you mean?
It's both. So it is right. The perfect storm. We don't offer out tips and things like that. There was an ongoing debate that has happened around 3 times around offering a different package, variable pay, performance-related pay. It hasn't always been proposed in maybe the right way, with this idea that if you're employee owned, there's more of a communal spirit, and having that individualistic kind of package doesn't always sit well with everyone. So and I'm not saying it can never happen, but how you get that across the line has to be well thought out. So that's been an ongoing challenge that we've had here. But that's trying to fix the problem of recruitment. How can we make this more attractive to people? So yeah, talent is a big one for us.
So as part of all the podcasts, I sort of wrap up with just a few quick-fire questions, so espresso shot questions, we call them. So you've got to finish this sentence. Employee ownership is?
Opportunity. It is life-changing, but it is the start. That is one part of it. And employee ownership can be the mechanism, but when you get it right, it is everything combined. And I think you've summed it up perfectly. Steak and salt.
Yeah, I'm doing a series of blogs at the moment, and I'm trying to do one a week, not quite working to one a week, but one of them is around transaction transition and transformation. Yeah. And the first one is relatively easy, the transaction, you just get it done. It's just filling lots of legal documents in. The transition is then the sort of early stage of when it's relatively new and fresh for people, and suddenly people start getting a EO bonus, which is nice. The transformation, I think, is the more difficult element, and it's been really insightful and helpful just hearing some of your journey, because you've been doing this for a long time. There are some real amazing insights there.
One big thing for us, which we haven't really gone into, was that international growth. So was, very much UK based, but it has expanded a lot. And that's, that can be difficult for an employee-owned business where you can't get the external cash injection, or it's harder. So that's all had to be organic growth, and that's added a lot more tension, a lot more complexity to the business. But the part I love about it is there's all these new landscapes, new horizons that we could go and really make an enormous difference in South Africa. And I guess what is special about this company is we were a founding member of the Employee Ownership Association in the UK. We can do that all over the world. And that's we'll do our bit as a business, and that's great. But if the legacy of Scott Bader, a company, could be, we can change communities all over the world, then, and that's the thing that really gets me excited.
Yeah, and I feel similarly. My role now, post being CEO here, is to sort of drive thinking around employee ownership in the business, in our business, but also to try and be evangelical about it externally as well, because I know the impact it's had on our business. And we could have done a trade sale, and the business would be, probably the name would have gone, the legacy, half the people would have disappeared. Yeah. So it's a phenomenal model. So that's that. We've only covered question one. Question two, my biggest EO surprise was,
I'm surprised how much people care, or genuinely care. It really is part. Well, your work is, for a lot of people, a lot of your identity. I'm such and such from here. Yeah. But there is so much pride around the name, the legacy, and although people at times will feel beaten up and it's difficult, they come back and people stay through the good times and the bad. People really do care.
Amazing, thanks. Are you a book reader? I often on the podcast ask for an interesting business book you might have read recently. I've shared on many a podcast. There's a book called Die with Zero that I particularly have enjoyed reading and sharing around. There's some really interesting employee ownership books as well. With the series I've just finished, which was with CEOs looking to either transition or have transitioned their business, there's a lovely book by Celia Dodd called Not Fade Away, which I wrote and have recommended to people, which is about the whole idea of essentially trying to avoid a cliff edge. You're CEO on the Friday, and the following Monday well, what are you? And that's a really interesting book. So I've recommended that to a few people. But is there any books, Sam, that you've read? I don't know if you are a reader of business books or anything that's particularly inspired you of late.
Yeah, I am, Barry, and I'm fortunate enough that my office is Ernest and Godric's library. I'm surrounded by all of the books, and when I should be doing something else, I'll pick up a book, and you can see their writing in pencil, and it's like reading the book with them. It is.
Oh wow! How lovely!
So yeah, it is so inspiring to sit in this room. So I could give you lots and lots, and I'm just going off my desk. The top one here. I read this year and thought it was incredible. You can see my post-it notes in there. Reinventing Organizations by Frederick.
Oh, okay.
And I love that book because it is full of really useful ideas on what different types of companies can be doing. This idea of teal organizations. And why I love this book is because we were pioneering in spirit in the 50s around profit sharing, how it should feel to work here, workers' rights, and all of this kind of stuff. And I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, we were pioneering then. Do we rest now? Now lots of other companies have caught up and we've achieved our mission, or do we continue to be pioneering? and I'm excited by continuing to be pioneering. And I think that's a book about pioneering organisations.
Would you say at Scott Bader that there is a sort of pioneering culture? Is that something that, if I spoke to other people in the business, is there that sense of we know where we've come from and we need to make sure that we maintain that for the future?
I think it's different in different parts of the business. We've got strong R&D. Lots of R&D that's still happening. So you've got that kind of spirit there. We've got incredible salespeople for that entrepreneurial aspect as well. I don't know if, I mean, maybe I might be doing us a disservice. Maybe we would describe ourselves like that now. It's certainly in our DNA. And I think if we can really tap into that, then that's where some more magic can happen.
If it was Ernest Bader, did you say?
Yeah.
If he were looking on the business now, do you think he'd be proud with what he sees? Do you ever reflect on that?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I was thinking about it yesterday because I read something. He'd written a note to his son Godric Bader, who was running the business, and it was in the 70s. And he was very unhappy because we weren't as big or as successful as the Mondragon Society in Spain. So he really did want us to be pushing on. And I think in all honesty, he would have expected us to have invented more, been more pioneering, and conquered the world, changed the world.
Interesting.
We would have had a new social order now.
Yeah.
So we haven't met those lofty expectations, but it doesn't mean that we're not trying.
But at the same time, you and your business, you have absolutely stuck to those founding principles, haven't you? We talked earlier about the fact that there were probably quite lucrative opportunities, but actually your values and your culture and your principles have said, actually, we're not going to go there, which is, a rare thing, I think, in this day and age.
Yeah, he was a tough leader, very high standards. Yeah.
Final, just opportunity to share one of three things, Sam. So first one is a moment of honesty, at a time when you've made a significant mistake, decision you regret, or a moment of self-doubt. So that's a moment of honesty. Second one is, and you get the choice, one of three, an unfiltered story. So a difficult setback in your business, a time when you've had to fire someone you liked, which I had to do, which is pretty difficult and challenging. Mm-hmm. And the third one is a secret struggle, something like imposter syndrome, balancing work and family. So anything, so we can get to know the real Sam a little bit better. Anything that you could leave us with around one of those three things.
Can I share a regret?
Of course.
Early on, when I joined the Members' Assembly, we agreed to freeze the salary of colleagues in Dubai because we'd recently conducted some benchmarking that said they were, significantly above the benchmark, whereas others in the group were not. And there wasn't enough money to go around, so we made the choice, freeze those people over there and reward there. And that freeze stayed in place longer than it should have. And I regret a lot that I didn't ask more. I didn't understand more about it. I didn't understand the philosophy behind the company well enough. And it was actually a person on the MA at the time who said, this isn't what Ernest would have wanted, which led me to sit in this room and read as much as I could about, because you can't throw that around and not really understand it. And what I regret is agreeing to that and for agreeing to it for as long as we did. And then going out and speaking with people and understanding how difficult that was for them, given that those colleagues who work in Dubai, it's a migrant workforce. You come in and you earn as much money and you go back home once or twice a year. so it was more important there. So that is, I regret that decision.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your honesty and sharing some great stories. Clearly, a business that's been around since 1921 has got a lot to share. And you've been really clear in terms of how the business operates, the principles that you will stick to through sounds like thick and thin. So I can only thank you so much for your time, Sam. And there'll be some great stuff in the show notes as a result of our time together. So really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, Barry.